Hello, everyone, and welcome back to part 2 of Navigating Business, a business podcast hosted by the U.S. Pan-Asian American Chamber of Commerce through the Community Navigator Pilot Program of the Small Business Administration. My name is Jeff Bautista, Program Director of the Asian Business Association of Orange County, and we will be continuing our conversation with Sheetal Desai, the President of the Southeast Chapter of the U.S. PAC, an attorney and managing partner at the Trusted Lawyers. I definitely see the value in that. But let's take a quick spin on it and maybe look at it from the pessimistic side of things.
Sure. Yeah.
Let's I guess what I'm going to ask next is what are the potential consequences then of signing a contract? So what's like the bad side of signing something without having done all this review and this like due diligence?
Well, ignorance of the law is not a defense. So if you sign something and say, well, I didn't know that that was a law, or I didn't know what I signed, doesn't hold up anywhere. If you sign it, it's assumed that you understood what you signed. So it's important to review it before you sign it. You know, don't blindly sign things because you're going to be bound to them, and it's not an excuse. You know, in court, if you go and say, well, I didn't really understand, I don't speak good English, or I didn't understand what the terms meant, you know, it's not a legal defense. The judge may feel sorry for you, but there's nothing they can do about it. You know, once you sign it, it's signed. So again, once you sign it, you're out of luck. So make sure you review it before. Yeah. I mean, other repercussions to signing is obviously you're bound by the terms of the contract, you know, whatever it says, and whatever it unfolds later on when you do figure out what you signed, you're bound to.
Yeah. Well, and that makes a lot of sense, especially when, it is something very significant on the line. Like if there is a big monetary dispute,
Sure.
and
Sure.
so your loss at that point is like, you have no case and you're going to lose out on whatever you're going to have to be on the hook for. So
Right.
that is a huge consequence, especially if it's, like you said, I just put together a whole order of, like 200,000 pieces of this part, and it's shipped and you're not going to pay me. And
because
they're just going to say,
well,
you signed this.
Yeah. And it, and then you could litigate about it, but now instead of the legal world is much better off on the preventative end, by making sure the contract is good. If you're reactive to it, and let's say you sign that contract, you got all this order shipped, and now they cancel it. Now you have to be reactive and maybe file a lawsuit. And it's way more expensive on that end. And there's a chance you're going to lose. So, it's like penny wise, pound foolish, right? So if you can spend a little bit up front, you will save yourself a whole lot of headache later on. But it's hard to see that all the time, especially when you're struggling new business and you can't see why you should spend any more money than what you've already invested in it.
Yeah, right. Oh gosh. So I'm going to try to dig a little bit deeper. So this is going to get into some stuff. So are there any specific laws or regulations that business owners should be aware of when entering into contracts, such as, consumer protection laws, antitrust laws, contract law principles, some of these things that they may have heard of?
So consumer protection is not typically available for business owners. That's for consumers. So like if you buy something at McDonald's and something goes awry or whatever, you have different rights there. As a business, courts typically look at business contracts as much more strict. So it's not in either business owner's favor because you're a business, it's automatically assumed that you're more savvy than the average consumer is. So there are no business protection laws the same way as you'll find in consumer law. Like in consumer law, you're allowed to break a contract in 3 days in a lot of states, right? You have like 72 hours to get out of a contract. Not so much in the business world. You signed it, you're done. There's not a whole lot of recourse, so it's very different. I always go back to leases because I feel like it's kind of a common thread between a lot of businesses, but even in lease law, in most courts, the consumer leases are far more strict and I guess I would say beneficial to the tenant. In commercial lease law, not so much. It's kind of a free-for-all. It's like whatever you sign for is what you get. The court's not going to interfere so much. They kind of stick to the contracts and go that way. So there are some laws as far as like antitrust and things like that, but a lot of them don't really apply to small businesses. It's usually on a much larger scale. of things that are going on. So most small businesses probably won't benefit from any kind of, any overreaching laws that are specifically set out to protect them.
So if I were to go then as a small business owner into a law office and I needed help regarding any, specifically like real estate or some of my business, am I seeking out like someone who specializes in real estate or someone who specializes in contract?
Yeah. So think of it like a doctor. If you've got something, on your hand, like something, a rash, like you're not going to go to a cardiologist, right? You're going to go to a skin doctor,
Mhm.
like a dermatologist. So similarly in law, there's lots of different fields. There are some generalities, like there are like business lawyers, there are like litigation lawyers, but usually in the business world, I would say the important types of lawyers to seek out are probably going to be business lawyers, maybe corporate lawyers, business litigation attorneys, and maybe like employment attorneys if you've got employment issues and things like that. But that's kind of like the umbrella you want to stick to. There are some general practitioners that are savvy in small business issues, or can help you with basic things like setting up an LLC or an operating agreement and things like that. But you wouldn't go to like a
Mhm.
divorce attorney, for business matters. It's just, you'd be better
Right.
served going to somebody who specializes in that area.
Yeah, and I think that makes sense, but I think it's important to hear because, some people, even go down the route of do it yourself thing because they have
Yes.
LegalZoom available to me or
Yes.
something,
Yes.
you know.
Yes. Yeah, and not to knock LegalZoom or anything. I mean, it's out there and it's better than nothing. But the problem is that if you don't understand the language and you're just plugging and chugging, it's no better than like you writing on a napkin, and just having both people sign it. At least in that instance, you write down what your understanding is. In a legal Zoom contract, you're just blindly inputting stuff without really even knowing what the contract says. So, I mean, I would say at the very least, even if it's in your own chicken scratch, write something down as far as what the two parties are understanding and what it is that they want to do for each other and what the understanding is. At least write that down. That's something that is better than an oral agreement, which, I mean, how do you prove that? That everybody just says, I didn't say that. So at least if you
Yeah.
can write something down, it's better than nothing. They're not always perfect and there's loopholes because you're not trained to think like attorneys. We always think of the worst case scenario and then back into the what you really want to do. And that's just how we're trained because we've seen things go south, and because we do litigation, kind of see the downfall of things not being written the right way. So that's
Mhm.
why our contracts keep getting longer and longer and longer. So,
Well, I mean, and so going into that where you're saying, you kind of look at the worst case scenario of it, how can one protect their business then in case that the other party does breach the contract, and what remedies are available to them under the law?
so it again depends on what kind of situation you're in, but there are things called legal remedies and then equitable remedies. So legal remedies are monetary, right? So if somebody doesn't perform on a contract, you can say, well, if they don't perform, this is a good estimate of what my damages would be, and you can call it liquidated damages. And it gives a surefire kind of result, and you may have to go to court to enforce it, but at least the other party also knows that if they don't perform, then this party is entitled to X amount of money. That's one way to do it. Then there's something called equitable remedy, and you have to be in the right court to enforce it, but you could make that person do what it is that they promised. An example of this would be like,
Mhm.
let's say a small business owner is trying to buy another business, okay, like another pizza shop, for example. And they sign a contract and whatever. And one fine day, the seller finds another buyer who's willing to give him 20,000 more. And he wants to breach the contract and say, oh, well, I don't want to sell this guy. I'm going to go to the other guy who's giving me 20,000 more. So what is our original owner, a buyer, going to do? Right. So either he can say, well, you breached the contract and you have to pay me liquidated damages, or I can take you to court and I can force you to sell it to me. So that's an equitable remedy that you can actually force them to do something. So sometimes it's good to have
Mhm.
both options available in a
Yeah.
contract. Yeah, because I mean these
Uh,
are real examples. This stuff happens, that the seller will
yeah.
renege on a deal because they found somebody better.
And that's, yeah, like, that's it's a common situation. I mean,
Yes.
just how
Yes.
you pose it, and
Yep.
And I'm gonna stretch a little bit more into your your years of experience here, because I believe you've seen so much of it. Is and I'm looking from the perspective now of like what people would call like a predatory contract, right?
Mhm.
So do you have any like kind of examples of what a small business may be being taken advantage of in a predatory contract, and kind of what lessons have you learned from that example?
Yeah, I mean, a predatory contract is again like one-sided. It's something where
Okay.
it's blatantly unfair to a party if that were to happen, right? And I've seen it in a lease agreement. I keep going back to that, but there's a lot of examples in that realm. So I've seen it where a landlord will enter into a lease with a tenant. A tenant, let's say it's a 5-year lease, but there's a tiny little clause hidden in there somewhere that says a landlord may terminate the lease at any time with 90 days notice. Well, that's horrible. If a business owner puts in like $250,000 to renovate the space, start their business, buy equipment, get things going, marketing expenses, employment expense, all this stuff, and a year or two in, the landlord says, "Oh, I found somebody who's going to pay me more rent. See you later. Here's your 90 days notice. You have to leave." That's horrible. That small business just lost all of their investment and they have to walk away. Like they just have to leave the premises. They can take their equipment, but what are they going to do with it? I mean, that's
Hmm.
like a horrible situation. I've seen contracts like that. I haven't actually seen a landlord enforce it, but if it's in there, I mean, it's scary, that could actually happen. So yeah, I mean, that
Yeah.
example and the other one where if you're a manufacturer of goods and the other party says, well, we can cancel it at any time, same kind of result, right? What do you do with $200,000 worth of custom made furniture or custom made anything? How do you recover from that? So yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, you got to look at these one-sided deals and these termination provisions, and make sure it's not in just one person's benefit. I mean, you could recraft those things to say, that somebody like a landlord could terminate the lease if they could provide you with substantially similar space in the shopping center in a different unit, right? So if they want to terminate and they want to move you over, okay, but then you got to pay me expenses to move and for marketing costs and whatever, and you can negotiate something like that. So part of the crux of all this is to understand why the other party has that provision in there. Sometimes it's not about being so predatory, but they just want one thing, but they've kind of slid in this whole clause in there that's like over encompassing. But maybe the landlord just wants flexibility in case they have a bigger tenant. And I've seen this happen. They just want flexibility in their shopping center to say, hey, would you be able to move if I get a bigger tenant who wants 3 spaces in a row and you happen to be part of it? Okay, I understand. So if I have to move, would you then compensate me for the move, expenses, blah blah blah, and reduce my rent for 6 months, something like that, right? So you can negotiate that, and now both parties are okay. So
Mhm.
part of it is understanding what that clause is and figuring out a solution as to what do both parties really want by this, what do they mean by this, and maybe we can craft it in a better way.
Hmm. And that kind of leads into, I was going to ask if, did you have an example of like where it was a triumphant outcome for the business owner against, like that situation where it might have been a little one-sided, but it worked out in the owner's favor?
I'd have to think about that. More often than not, it doesn't work that way.
And I think, and that's to the point right there, right?
Yeah.
It's like, it
Uh,
doesn't, you're looking at a very slim
yeah.
slim chance of it working out in your favor.
I
And
I did
again,
see one. I mean, there was one situation where it was similar, where a landlord had drafted a clause about an option to purchase, and it was vague, and so the tenant couldn't enforce it. But eventually, the only reason it worked out is because the landlord didn't want to get stuck in prolonged litigation, and it's because the tenant took the chance and filed a lawsuit even though they weren't sure they were going to win, but it pushed the landlord into a corner and made them settle. So in that case, the
mhm,
tenant won, probably wouldn't have if it had gone to trial, but they won just because of the circumstances and the cost and the overbearing nature of the lawsuit, that the landlord just said, okay, forget it. Let's just negotiate this and be done with it. So sometimes a little bit of pressure goes a long way too. but that's where the tenant has to take a leap of faith and hire an attorney and get something moving,
Hmm.
So
Well,
yeah, I mean,
I think
not
this,
common.
yeah, it just paints a picture that, contracts aren't meant to be weapons. They're not weaponized things meant to injure some party over the other. Really, it's
Right.
to protect everybody
Yeah,
involved,
yeah. It's supposed
and
to.
just keep it clear.
Yeah, exactly. It's just supposed to be on paper what you're thinking. Like whatever your thoughts are and your agreements are should be put on paper. That's all it is. Memorializing an agreement. You know.
Awesome. Well, we're going to go ahead and wind down from our conversation here, but there was one thing, because you're such a great asset, you've accomplished so much. I wanted to throw this question in here, and this is
Sure.
because our audience, I'm sure, is, many of them are very either new to business, or they're just very young in their careers as well. So for those young people out there who are looking to get into law and business law, what sort of advice would you give to them?
People are trying to get into the legal field.
Yeah, and do what you do, because you're obviously you're a huge value to business owners and the whole process.
I think, I grew up in obviously I'm a minority, and my parents had this struggle, and I feel like they didn't have all the assets growing up, as far as they didn't have everything that they needed to be. I mean, they were successful, but they had to learn everything on their own. Like my dad would sit there at night and try to figure out QuickBooks and Peck and, because there was nobody to tell him how to do it better. And he carried out things, and luckily he had a good he did have an attorney, he had a CPA, and they advised him on how to do things. But I feel like I have been lucky enough to be in this position and be involved with the US PAC and the CMPP program, and it's kind of I enjoy it. I want to help business owners succeed. Even my line of business is like that. I mean, I've got lots of businesses, clients that are small business owners, and they started with like one gas station. Now they're at number 26, or one restaurant, and now they've grown to like a franchise. So it's really fulfilling to see that people that just on a whim, or on, a slight bit of hope and some money that they had put together, took a chance and they lived the American dream. That's really what it's about, is just to help people navigate, and to maybe shed some light on the fact that it doesn't all have to be so scary. When people hear contract and lawyers, and they don't want anything to do with it, the first instinct is to let's try to avoid this. They're just expensive, or we don't understand, or whatever. But in this day and age, I feel like there's enough attorneys that speak different languages also, so that we can break that barrier, right? Like I have a lot of clients, and I speak Gujarati, which is like an Indian dialect, but there are so many times when my clients speak pretty good English, but they're just more comfortable in Gujarati. And so we converse in Gujarati, and they have a better understanding. I can't tell you how many times I'm in a deposition, and the parties are talking, and I can tell that the attorney asking the questions didn't understand what the witness meant. And it's not because they didn't speak English. It's just the way they said the words and the way they were understood. It's not what they meant to say. And so things are lost in translation. I'm sure if you speak another language, or you grew up in a family that speaks another language, things are lost in translation. And it's not meant, it's not unintentional, but it just happens. It's something is lost in that, in that. And so I would encourage, on two sides. One is for business owners to go out and seek attorneys that speak their language. If it makes them more comfortable, find somebody who can speak your language, and you should be able to at this point. There's enough of that first generation that has gone into the legal field, and your language should be covered, whatever it is. And then for those of us that are younger generation that's trying to get into these fields, whatever you do, you're going to be successful at this point, because your family's worked hard to get you to where you are. And so think about giving back, do something for the community that supported you and your family all these years, and make it better for the next generation.
Awesome. And I love to end these interviews on that sort of inspirational note,
Mm-hmm.
because through the course of the interview here, our podcast, we can definitely see how much value you bring and how much of an expert you are. And then, I'm sure there's those of us who are listening who then feel like, what, I want to be able to provide that to my community, to, like you said, to my own business owner, family members, and to just take everything that you've you've put here. You've put such a personable human face on such a difficult, complex concept and really made it very relatable. So we really appreciate that. So to wrap up, where can business owners locate you and how can they get in touch with you in case they need help and resources for their small business?
You can go to our website, thetrustedlawyers.com. I can give out our number as well. And we are doing free consultations through the CNPP program still. And the number is 678-502-7464. Or you can just send an email real quick to cnpp@thetrustedlawyers.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Sheetal, for this wonderful conversation. It's good to listen to more stories of Asian Americans and minorities and learn how to navigate around business needs, especially for communities that lack access to support that they need. Thank you to our audience for tuning in. We hope that you can join us again next time at Navigating Business, a podcast brought to you by the U.S. Pan Asian American Chamber of Commerce through the Community Navigator Pilot Program of the Small Business Administration. And also, remember to check out our 2023 celebration event. That's America's largest and longest running business development conference convened by Pan Asian Americans from June 6th to June 8th. Please visit our website at celebrationconference.com. All right, everyone. Thank you very much for tuning in and check back in with you next time. Thank you.